This is the first time that we actually don't start at the launch of Destiny or any trailer. Instead, we jump ahead a week after Destiny's launch with the release of the first raid, the Vault of Glass. However, the exotic of today's video, Vex Mythoclast, did not drop from the Vault of Glass. Rather, it dropped solely from the hard mode version. Vex dropped solely from RNG from killing Atheon on hard mode. The exact drop chance at the time of release is unknown from what I can gather, but upon reading some community posts, it seemed that it was actually quite high. Some saying that at least one person got it every time in their fire team per run, some saying got it first run, got one in 3 runs, and then some saying never got one in 20 runs. So my guess is that while it was still RNG to actually earn it, the odds may have been a little higher than what we're used to nowadays with RNG exotics. The weapon itself is truly one of a kind and actually has nothing that can compare to it. It's labeled as a fusion rifle, however it behaves more to that of an auto rifle. There's no charge time and shoots a single shot much like an auto rifle. It also has solar damage and is a primary weapon as well, which is very uncommon for Destiny 1. Its perks were Zen Moment, causing damage with the weapon increases stability, and crowd control, kills increased damage for a short time. Something I never realized until doing the research for this video is that the description is actually the explanation for how the weapon works. Its description reads, "A casual loop within the weapon's mechanism," suggesting that the firing process somehow binds space and time into... The end there seems to run off. However, repeating the description onto itself is the key. Casual loop within the weapon's mechanism, suggesting that the firing process somehow binds space and time into a casual loop within the weapon's mechanism, suggesting that the firing process, you get the point. The weapon is locked in a time loop that fires the first bolt of a burst, then resets. The process repeats over and over again as long as the trigger is held down. It's so clever. I love the Vex. Its name also ties into the theme of the Vex being Greek mythos and legends. Mythoclast is derived from the word mythos, obviously, meaning fabled or legend, and clast is derived from the word klastos, which is derived from the word klau, which means break, therefore klastos means broken in pieces, and so Mythoclast roughly translates into breaker of myths or destroyer of myths. I interpret this to then mean the weapon means either Vex, destroyer of myths, meaning the Vex themselves are destroying guardian myths, i.e. the Traveler or other potent figures that are not Vex related, or destroyer of Vex myths, which would be relating to us, the Guardians, as we did to acquire the weapon. Going to the Vex's domain, facing against their ontological weapons, the Gorgons and Atheon, and destroying them. Once again, I love the Vex. On release, Vex was very powerful inside of the Crucible. Its great stats and perks combined with a frame that probably wasn't really tested all that much made it extremely dominant. Its TTK was a very low 0.833 seconds for body shots. For headshots, a little less at 0.667. It dealt 56 to the head and 45 to the body with a fire rate of 360 RPM. As far as PvE usage goes, I don't think it was really used that often as exotic special and heavy weapons played a much bigger role than exotic primaries. There were some exotic primaries that were still used, but those were tailored more to the PvE side of things to begin with. Vex, while a very unique weapon, was honestly nothing more than a glorified auto rifle with good stats and perks. There wasn't any flashy gimmicks to it like heal on kills, massive super energy gain on kills, or damage over time effects. And finally, before we start going through the patch notes, the Grimoire card for Vex reads, "Some legends live forever, others are overwritten, reshaped by the sheer will of those who believe that any ordeal can be conquered, any foe vanquished, any god cast down. The Mythoclast is a Vex instrument from some far-flung corner of time and space, mysteriously fit for human hands. Its origins, mechanism of action, and ultimate purpose remain unknown. Perhaps it will reveal itself to you in time." On October 14th, 2014, Bungie realizes how strong Vex was and nerfed its base damage by a massive 34%, but increased precision damage multiplier from 1.25x to 1.5x. On December 1st, 2014, attack power increased from 300 to 323, base damage increased, fixed a bug introduced in a previous patch, and nerfed the benefit of enhanced battery, aka larger magazine. I don't know what bug they refer to here, but while looking, it seems there was another bug going around slightly after this patch. I'm unaware how long this was in the game, as again there wasn't any mention of it in the patch notes, but the bug was where you could sometimes respawn with Vex behaving like a normal fusion rifle. 3 shots, slow charge time, and fires a burst of projectiles which reportedly had the range of Vex, so a lot of range. This also had the stability of Vex, which means your reticle did not move at all when you fired. It's actually pretty insane. On May 15th, 2015, fixed an issue where Vex did not respawn with any ammo. This may have been the patch that fixed the bug I had just mentioned. On September 8th, 2015, projectile speed and stability increased in order to compensate with the global fusion rifle changes that also happened in this patch. Those changes being, fusion rifles now no longer get more accurate with each projectile fired, max fusion rifle projectile speed decreased slightly, damage done against AI competence increased by 15%, and accuracy increased for low-range fusion rifles and reduced for high-range fusion rifles. I guess it's as good of a time as any to mention how I actually skimmed through these notes. I simply look for keywords such as the exotic of the video and the associated archetype of the weapon. No, I don't use AI for any of this. I know I shouldn't have to clarify that, but nowadays it seems like a good idea to distinguish myself from that. In this case, it's a fusion rifle. However, we both know that this is no ordinary fusion rifle. And while this specific patch makes mention of a change to Vex in order to compensate for the rest of the family changing, I don't really know which patches really affected Vex or not. Usually if this is the case, I've just included it unless it specifically says it's not included, but now, I don't know. This patch also states fusion rifle damage increased by 15% to AI competence. Does this affect Vex? I don't know. Between all this and all the stealth nerfs or buffs that happen to other weapons that don't appear in the patch notes, why? Why? Why not include everything? Who cares if people don't read it all? Just include it. Any change to the game, you just make mention of it somewhere at least and be exact and coherent. There's no need to be broad about a substantial change to the way something works. Just make my job a little easier. Rants about Bungie's badly organized patch notes aside, Year 1 perks were nerfed. Aggressive ballistics reduced damage bonus by 50% and increased stability and range penalties by 100%. Linear compensator reduced damage by 50%. Smart drift control reduced stability bonus by 40% and reduced range penalty by 33%. Extended mag reduced magazine bonus by 33%. And Send It reduced range bonus by 40% and added inventory and equip penalties. On December 8th, 2015, for fusion rifles in general, increased ADS and crouch stability, reduced hipfire stability, reduced carry ammunition for fusions, and increased damage by 10% to compensate. I'd just suggest taking any patch note I mentioned regarding universal fusion rifle changes with a grain of salt. As I said, I don't know if they affected Vex or not. On April 12th, 2016, for fusions, increased stability base stat. For Vex, reduced damage base stat to compensate for stability buff. With the greatest update to Destiny came the reprisal of every raid in the first game. This of course meant the return of Vault of Glass, and with it, the newly updated version of Vex Mythoclast. The only difference it has here is power level and a new ornament, and with this brings the end of Destiny 1. The Season of the Splicer, Season 14. That happened 5.5 years ago. Welcome back the return of Destiny's first raid. With it came a plethora of great quality of life changes, secrets, better tuned encounters, the first free-to-play raid, the first challenge mode world's first raid, because it's the first reprised raid, the first master raid, the first actually challenging master raid, at the start, pre-nerf, armor sets, weapons, and of course, Vex Mythoclast. Vex stays true to D1, but with some extra flavor added to fit in with Destiny 2. It's still an auto rifle mixed with a fusion rifle, but now when you get kills, you gain stacks of overcharge. When at max overcharge, hold reload to switch into a linear fusion rifle mode. You get 3 shots of linear fusion rifle that deal good damage. Much like how the description of the weapon explains how the weapon works, the perks for the overcharge bit also explain itself. The volatile battery perk states, this battery simultaneously exists in multiple timelines, causing the weapon to overcharge. And given the fact that you can build overcharge to then use it like a linear, this could suggest that defeating targets with the Vex Mythoclast causes it to pull energy from alternate timeline variants of itself, which it stores within itself until the linear mode is activated, at which point the Mythoclast can fire 3 linear shots with energy drawn from alternate versions of itself in other timelines, similar to how No Time to Explain operates. Vex also has a little secret inside of the vault too. If you take Vex to 5 secret portals throughout the raid, you can spawn a series of oracles on each plate that will progress a counter when all are shot in the correct order. After doing this for all 5 plates, you'll be led to a secret portal off in the distance that's now activated. Where this portal shows and leads to on the other side will be a point of discussion for the next video in this series. For now, we just care about what we earn when we step into it, which of course is the newly added catalyst to the weapon. This catalyst sort of replaces the crowd control perk it had in D1, where it's now called Calculate Balance. Kills with the weapon increase damage, accuracy, and stability whilst in the auto mode for a short time. On re-release, this weapon was underwhelming, to say the most. It wasn't that good, and didn't really fit into the sandbox that well. Compared to other exotics in the same slot, its damage was okay, and the linear fusion mode was a very interesting quirk it had, but overall, people didn't really care that much about it. Even in PvP, I don't really know how often it was used at release, but given the reception of the response it had in PvE, I'm thinking it was more or less the same. However, in PvP, it only takes 2 kills to enter the linear mode, and that works exactly as it should, so maybe it had some lethality there, but that wouldn't really work too well inside of comp or trials, so as you soon will see, I believe this is because they didn't want a repeat of D1's Vex, where it was pretty severely overtuned, and they played it safe. With the launch of the Season of the Lost came a patch for Vex specifically that buffed it massively. PvE damage increased by a massive 40%, range increased to exceed best-in-class high-impact auto rifles, increased stability, reworked the catalyst to grant stability and damage after a kill, increased rate of fire from 360 to 390 RPM, reduced charge time of linear fusion mode from 820 to 533, now in line with all other linears, and no longer loses stacks of overcharge if stowed except only when in the linear fusion mode. And this season brought with it one of the best artifact perks we've ever had, being particle deconstruction. This mod made it so hitting bolts with fusion rifles gave it a stacking damage bonus of up to 40% extra damage for fusion and linear fusion rifles against non-red bar enemies. This was basically all the meta was for this 6-month season. And just as the whipped cream, caramel drizzle, and cherry on top, it also had Unstoppable Fusion Rifle as another artifact mod. Usage numbers transcended space-time with these changes, and the popularity of Vaulted Glass went through that portal as well, since now everyone felt the need to have this weapon, which unfortunately did not have the same frequency in drops as its older brother. No, this weapon felt like it would never drop for some people, with some having clears in the triple digits and not having it. So once again, I'm at an impasse. Vex technically is considered a fusion rifle, however, its D2 counterpart has a linear fusion rifle mode that it can switch to. Does this mode inherit changes made to all other linear fusion rifles? Who knows? I don't know, but like with the fusion rifle blanket changes, let's just assume they do, to give myself a little bit of ease of mind. On December 7th, 2021, reduced aim assist on Vex by 25, reduced linear fusion aim assist cone scaler from 1.1 to 1.05, and now requires 3 guardian kills instead of 2 to fully overcharge the weapon. Linear fusion rifles damage in PvE increased by 10% as well. On May 24th, 2022, for fusion rifles, reduced damage falloff for both near and far distances, and reduced recoil scalar variance between 0 and 100 stability. All in all, this is just a fancy way of saying that the stability and damage falloff was nerfed slightly. On July 19th, 2022, changed the previously added flinch increase to only apply to damage from other players, and fixed an issue where linear fusion rifles had unintentional reduced damage against champions. On November 7th, 2022, for linears, increased flinch from player damage, increased flinch settle time by 60%, and significantly reduced the flinch received by NPCs by 80%. On February 27th, 2023, reduced damage of linears against champions, bosses, mini-bosses, and vehicles by 15%. On August 22nd, 2023, for Vex specifically, RPM reduced to match that of other high-impact autos, from 390 RPM to 360 RPM, and increased damage to minor and major enemies by 15%. Now, as if by some cruel joke specifically made in my expense, I want to direct you to the phrasing there, to match that of other high-impact auto rifles. That phrasing is pretty peculiar, so I did some poking around and found multiple people saying that 360 auto changes also affected Vex.
Kill me! I want to die!
I'm more than halfway through the patch notes and only now just found this out. I love this weapon, don't get me wrong, but I hate the patch notes for this. Like, why could you not have specified that this change that affects auto rifles also affects Vex? I'll put these notes at the very end if anyone cares to see changes that may or may not affect Vex. You know, I try to be as thorough and accurate as I can when I make these, but Bungie really does not like to make that easy and convenient, do they? Moving on October 3rd, 2023, fixed an issue where Vex was benefiting from the damage bonus of special ammo fusions in Checkmate game mode. On October 17th, 2023, reduced the minimum damage fusions can deal after damage falloff from 50% to 45%. On November 28th, 2023, for Vex specifically, increased damage versus miners by 10%, bosses by 25%, and champions within the LFR mode by 200% for Vex. On March 5th, 2024, increased ADS damage falloff scalar from 1.5x to 1.7x. On June 4th, 2024, increased fusion rifle damage by 7%, and linear fusion rifle damage by 5%. Exotic intrinsic damage boost against miners reduced from 40% to 30% as well. So with the newfound knowledge that auto buffs may affect Vex more than fusions, in this patch, auto rifles got a 10% damage buff, and fusions got a 30% damage buff. Vex seemed to have gotten the 10% buff due to some people confirming so via a Reddit post. I know I said those will be mentioned later, but this specific patch was mentioned while confirming the suspicion of if Vex got auto changes. LFR's got a 10% damage buff as well. Also added back particle deconstruction as particle reconstruction, which is a slightly weaker mod at only around 27% damage bonus instead of the 40. On July 15th, 2025, fixed an issue where Vex's auto fire couldn't be interrupted by initiating a reload. On August 5th, 2025, fixed an issue where Vex's rate of fire was unintentionally reduced. And on September 9th, 2025, Vex is updated to where the overcharge meter is displayed under the reticle of the weapon, as well as the HUD. And with the final major update to the game, we get a couple of changes to Vex. Starting off with Vex itself, wait, auto rifles. Why is that the first in the list? Wait, you mean to tell me they do specifically mention that a change with high impact auto rifles also affects Vex? And they made an exact mention of it? They clarified? They finally fixed the gripe I just discovered I had, but only at the end? For high-impact auto rifles, increased RPM from 360 to 400. This includes Vex. Actually, for Vex itself, now has an intrinsic version of a more potent version of rewind rounds. Precision kills with the LFR mode triggered ignitions. After leaving LFR mode, magazine is fully refunded, HUD buffed and magazine displays how many LFR shots remain, and sustained damage with the weapon now activates the catalyst in addition to kills. Also added a HUD buff and now has intrinsic anti-barrier. And that's it for any Vex, Fusion, and Linear Fusion patches. Alright, let's speedrun through these patch notes. On October 14th, 2014, base damage of auto rifles reduced by an absolutely massive 2%. Reduced precision-based multiplier from 1.5x to 1.25x. Instability reduced by 4 to 17% modified by stat. On February 25th, 2015, reduced base damage of all auto rifles by an even bigger amount than last time, 2.5%, and reduced effective range values. On September 8th, 2015, increased base damage of auto rifles across all archetypes. Damage falloff starts closer to the player to emphasize its role as a close-range weapon. Base stability reduced slightly, landing consistent precision shots require more weapon control, and damage done against AI combatants increased by 30%. On December 8th, 2015, increased damage of all auto rifles by the biggest amount so far, ranging from 0.04% to 0.3%, depending on rate of fire. Vex would have gotten a 0.3 as it is a slow rate of fire auto. On April 12th, 2016, increased damage of auto rifles again, slow rate of fire autos got a 2.3% buff, and fast rate of fire got nerfed by 2.5% instead. On February 14th, 2017, increased precision damage modifier from 1.25x to 1.3x, increased damage of low rate of fire auto rifles by 2.5%, and increased in-air accuracy. On March 28th, 2017, auto's minimum damage, aka damage at max falloff distance, increased by 7%. And that's it for D1. With D2, we start with May 24th, 2022, increased damage falloff near distance by 0.75 meters for auto rifles. On July 19th, 2022, increased body shot damage from 19 to 20 Precision multiplier moves from 1.6 to 1.5, crit damage stays the same at 30 for Crucible. On August 23, 2022, increased base stability stat on all high-impact auto rifles by 6 to 12 depending on the weapon. On October 18, 2022, increased the effects of the stability stat on recoil reduction by around 20% at the high end for auto rifles. On January 24, 2023, reduced airborne effectiveness of auto rifles by 20%. On April 18, 2023, increased damage of auto rifles against minor and major enemies by 25%. On October 3rd, 2023, increased bonus damage of auto rifles inside of Checkmate by 2%. On November 28, 2023, increased damage against red bars by 10% for autos. Vex also got a 10% buff against minors, so make of that what you will. On January 9, 2024, for Crucible, body shot damage scalar of autos reduced from 2 to 0%. Critical hit damage increased from 2 to 14%. On March 5th, 2024, increased crit damage in Crucible by 14%. On June 4th, 2024, again, exotic weapon damage bonus against minors was reduced to 30%, but exotic auto rifles get buffed by 15%. On October 8th, 2024, increased crit damage by 5 to 7% and decreased body shot damage by 5 to 7%, depending on subfamily. For PvP, high impacts base damage increased from 22 to 23, and critical hit damage increased from 40.1 to 41.4. On February 4th, 2025, auto rifles damage against minors and majors increased by 10%. On May 6th, 2025, for high impact autos, increased base damage by 4%, body shot goes from 23 to 24, critical hit goes from 41.4 to 43.2. And on June 9th, 2026, high impacts increased RPM from 360 to 400, reduced ADS damage falloff scalar from 1.7 to 1.6, reduced base damage from 24 to 22. This includes Vex Mythoclast and Suros Regime with dual speed receiver, but excludes Cerberus +1 and Sweet Business in its non-spun up state. And that's it. Again, I'll reiterate that you should probably take a lot of these changes with a grain of salt. Vex is such an interesting case here that a lot of these changes could very much apply to Vex, the auto changes, the fusions, and the linear, but a lot of those same changes could not. Obviously, I cut a lot of the changes that for sure did not make sense when talking about Vex, like fusion rifle spread and burst linear fusions, and any patches about the weapon families that happened prior to Vex. Well, I guess I can say that this saves me a little time in the future for when I do an exotic auto rifle. Yeah, that's it, because I'm just that much of an overachiever. Well, hopefully you stuck around for the end of this cacophony of a weapon history. This was, by far, the worst weapon I've had to cover so far. Not because the weapon itself is horrendous, but because of its identity crisis patch notes. So, if you like this series and want to see it continue, let me know, and let me know what weapon to do next. Preferably one that is one archetype of a weapon and not 3. But beggars can't be choosers. Until next time, see ya.